Look closely at the crowds filling the streets of Buenos Aires. Look at the faces celebrating on the pitches of the World Cup. To the modern world, Argentina presents a singular defining image. It is widely considered the most European nation in South America. But history hides a paradox. If you roll back the clock to the year 1778, the official census ordered by the Spanish Empire revealed a reality that modern Argentina has spent over a century trying to forget. In 1778, nearly 37% of the population of Buenos Aires, more than one-third, was black. In certain provinces, Afro-descendants made up over half the population. African culture, labor, and intellect were deeply woven into the very foundation of the country. Yet within a matter of generations, an entire demographic virtually vanished from the nation's streets, its records, and its history books. How does a population of hundreds of thousands of people completely disappear? The answer is a systematic, three-part domino effect: a brutal war, a weaponized disease, and an aggressive government policy explicitly designed to replace them. This is the untold story of how an entire population was mathematically, physically, and historically erased. To understand how the black population vanished, we must first understand how they arrived. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, the port city of Buenos Aires became a massive, lucrative hub for human trafficking. Millions of enslaved people were violently captured from West and Central African nations, predominantly Angola, Congo, and Mozambique. Human bondage wasn't just a minor industry here, it was the primary economic engine fueling the wealth of the capital. Enslaved Africans built the infrastructure, worked the elite households, and drove the economy. Trapped in a brutal caste system, these Afro-Argentines held tightly to their roots. They formed community societies based on their African nations, preserving their rhythms and traditions. And it was in these very Afro-Argentine communities that Argentina's most famous cultural export was born: the tango. While the world today associates tango with European elegance, its origins belong entirely to the African diaspora. The very word, tango, traces back to African languages, likely the Kibundu word from Angola meaning a closed space or house of drums. It was a rhythmic dance created by black residents in the impoverished barrios of Buenos Aires. But as the 1800s progressed, Argentina's ruling white elite began to look at this thriving 37% of the population not as a cultural treasure, but as an obstacle to their vision of a civilized, Europeanized nation. And soon, a series of catastrophic events gave them the perfect opportunity to dismantle it. In 1864, South America erupted into the deadliest international conflict in its history, the Triple Alliance War. Argentina, allied with Brazil and Uruguay, launched a brutal campaign against Paraguay. For Argentina's ruling white elite, this war was a horrific opportunity. The government, led by President Bartolomé Mitre, began forcefully conscripting disproportionate numbers of Afro-Argentine men into the military. They were sent directly to the front lines, used as literal cannon fodder in the most lethal skirmishes as replacements to spare the lives of white soldiers. But amidst this systematic cruelty, heroes emerged. Among them was Maria Remedios del Valle, an Afro-Argentine woman who marched into battle alongside her husband and sons. She didn't just nurse the wounded, she took up arms, fighting fiercely on the front lines. The cost of her patriotism was devastating. She watched her husband and both of her sons die on the battlefield. She was shot multiple times, captured by enemy forces, tortured and publicly whipped for days. Yet her courage was so legendary that the soldiers gave her a title, La Madre de la Patria, the Mother of the Fatherland. But when the war finally ended in 1870, the true damage to the Afro-Argentine community became clear. An entire generation of young black men had been completely wiped out on the battlefields. This created a massive, catastrophic gender imbalance back home, leaving a population of grieving women and children with no protection. And just as the survivors tried to pick up the pieces, an invisible killer struck the capital. In 1871, a devastating yellow fever outbreak hit Buenos Aires, carried back to the capital by soldiers returning from the war zones. Within weeks, the disease transformed the bustling city into a massive quarantine camp. The impact of the plague was split starkly along racial and economic lines. The wealthy, white European elite immediately fled the low-lying southern neighborhoods like San Telmo, escaping to the safer, higher ground of the north. Left behind were the Afro-Argentines, trapped by extreme poverty in crowded, unsanitary tenement housing known as conventillos. With zero access to clean water, medical aid, or government relief, the black community bore the absolute brunt of the plague. The disease tore through the community like wildfire, killing thousands of Afro-Argentines in a matter of months and forcing the few survivors to scatter out of the city center entirely. The plague had finished what the war started, fracturing the community beyond repair. By the mid-1850s, the physical destruction left behind by war and disease was met with a ruthless political agenda. Argentina's ruling elite, most notably intellectuals like Juan Bautista Alberdi and President Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, held a radical conviction: to become a civilized, modern superpower, Argentina had to purge its non-white identity and become European. Alberti famously wrote the phrase, "To govern is to populate." But his true meaning was deeply sinister: to populate the country with white Europeans, to systematically displace black and indigenous people. They literally codified this racial hierarchy into Article 25% of their 1853 Constitution, explicitly mandating that the government must foster and fund European immigration. Between 1880 and 1914, over 4 million European immigrants flooded into Argentina, the vast majority of them single white men. This massive influx collided with a tragic demographic crisis. The Triple Alliance War had just decimated the black male population, leaving behind a severe shortage of black men and a surplus of European men. The ruling class saw this as the perfect biological machine for erasure. This led to a wave of interracial marriages, but these unions were rarely a product of simple romance. They were driven by a calculated system of survival. The state systematically stripped Afro-Argentines of access to basic resources. Black citizens were denied quality education, barred from high-paying employment, pushed into the deepest margins of poverty, and excluded from legal protections. To survive, black women were backed into a corner. Marrying a white European immigrant became the only pathway to secure legal rights, social status, and a future for their children. The state rewarded this mixture because with every generation the African complexion was diluted. A child born mixed was legally reclassified in the census from Negro to Pardo and eventually to Blanco. Blackness wasn't just fading naturally, it was being systematically traded away for the basic right to survive, by forcing Afro-descendants into a hierarchy where survival required shedding their identity. Argentina successfully engineered a biological and administrative erasure. Today, when the world looks at Argentina, the erasure looks complete. The modern nation proudly boasts of its European heritage, treating the 37% black population of its past as a historical myth or a minor footnote. But history leaves scars that cannot be fully bleached away. The rhythms of the tango, the wealth of the capital, and the very ground of its battlefields belong to the thousands of Afro-Argentines whose names were intentionally scrubbed from the history books. They didn't just disappear. They were erased. This leaves us with a profound question. How many other nations built their modern paradise on top of a history they chose to completely wipe away? How does a country heal from an erasure so deep that its own citizens don't even know it happened? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How should modern societies confront a past that has been entirely scrubbed from their textbooks? In our next video, we are crossing the ocean to uncover another hidden global conspiracy that rewrote the history of an entire continent. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and don't miss the next chapter of The Untold Truth.